Such a great discussion with David. Thank you very much, David. So that was Proverbs chapter 24. Join us next week as we go through Proverbs chapter 25 on David's discussions. So to continue on the night, we're going to go through our main talk, which is given by Marc Eskander on Exodus chapter 22. So Marc, whenever you're ready, thank you.
Do you guys want to move to the front? Since it's very weird to talk to empty benches. No? Okay. Thanks, James. Thanks, James. Guys, come. Like, there's 20 of you we should not seen. Okay, so we're doing, as Marc said, Exodus 22. Anyone want to quickly summarize Exodus 21 for me? Because I wasn't here, no. And I can't find a Bonaden's talk on Upper Romania. Anything? Yep. 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 Mm-mm. Okay, good. So yeah, Exodus 22 continues from 21, where basically God is like clarifying, or Moses is like clarifying the 10 Commandments essentially, and like, you know, giving a bit more detail and giving some like specific examples. You know, do not steal. Yeah, sure, but like, what? Do not steal. What are the consequences? That sort of thing. So, that's 21, 22, 23, 24, I think. I think those are the chapters that are discussing that. And like James said, it's not so much about like what's the punishment or what are the consequences. It's more God is trying to protect the rights of criminals and victims as well. And how do you judge between the two? And not just, you know, eye for an eye, get revenge, you know, but trying to actually include an element of mercy. And we'll see like how that plays out in Exodus 22. So it's broken up into 3 or 4 main parts. First half talks all about stealing. The second part, the next big part, talks about adultery from verse 16 to 20. 21 to 27 is about oppression, and then from 28 to 31 is about cursing and the rights of God, robbing God of his rights. All right, so we'll start in the name of Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit, one God, amen. So can someone read, verse 1 to 4, just what's up there? If someone wants to volunteer. Kira? Thanks. All right, if you can't, okay. James?
If a man steals an ox or a sheep and slaughters it or sells it, he shall restore 5 oxen for an ox and 4 sheep for a sheep. If the thief is found breaking in and he is struck so that he dies, there shall be no guilt for his bloodshed. If the sun has risen on him, there shall be guilt for his bloodshed. He should make full restitution. If he has nothing, then he shall be sold for his theft. If the theft is certainly found alive, if the theft is certainly found alive in his hand, whether it is an ox or donkey or sheep, he shall restore double.
Okay, good. So obviously we're talking about the commandment, do not steal, the 8th commandment. And like the passage is pretty like self-explanatory, so we don't really need to like go into too much detail about what the passage means practically for the Israelites. Like, it's very clear, like if you steal a sheep, you have to give 4 back. So we're just going to talk a little bit more about how this can apply to us and what it means for us in 21st century. Obviously, we're not stealing oxen or sheep, so well, hopefully we're not. But the first thing to notice is that there's no actual like concept of imprisoning the person who commits this crime. Nowhere is it mentioned that we're in prison. That's like a concept that came later on, probably by like pagans, because I think like the first time it appears is like when Joseph was imprisoned. So it doesn't really seem that imprisoning someone is a concept for the Jews. And like this is the first time that we see, or like the first time in this chapter that we see how God's mercy is displayed through these commandments, in that He's even caring for the person who's committing the crime, saying that I don't want you to just be locked up and be useless, but you can work off, your crime. You can, if you steal an oxen, if you give 5 back, you can, you're free to go. If you steal a sheep, you're free to go. So it's a very like positive, almost positive punishment, that not only is He helping the person who's committed the crime see kind of hope and he has a future, but also the person who's been robbed not only receives what he's been robbed of, but also receives some extra compensation for, if they've lost income or grain or wheat or whatever, they're also compensated. So God is very kind of like fair, but also merciful as well. And that's a very like common pattern that we see, is that there is justice, but it's through mercy. It's through being merciful. And that's throughout the whole Bible. Like, and God says, like, I desire mercy, not sacrifice. Like, at the end of the day, God is after mercy. He wants to have mercy. But because we're human and because, we're all sinful, we all do wrong things, there has to be an element of fairness and an element of, consequence for our actions. And so something for us that's practical is that, yes, if we steal something from someone, or, and it might not be stealing something, it might be, robbing someone of, for example, their reputation, talking someone badly about someone, and stealing, someone's good opinion of someone from them, or we cause hurt to someone, or we cause any sort of pain to someone. And apologizing is great, but I see apologizing as kind of you've given back, 1 for 1. That's you've done what you're required to do, but that's it. You haven't really done anything to mend anything. You haven't fixed their pain. You haven't, tried to do anything extra for them. And so, with the 4, the fact that we're replacing it 4 or 5 times, for us, it's kind of the whole second mile thing, that we should always be going above and beyond if we've done something or whatever, to try and, not just make that person feel like, we're sorry, but like I said, if, for example, if we've spoken ill of someone and, their reputation is tarnished, to actually go that extra step to speak well of them and to uplift them in front of people, and to make sure people know that, we think highly of them. And yeah, look, it might look a bit hypocritical. 2 minutes ago you were just talking badly about them and all of a sudden whatever, but you're doing your best to try and remedy that situation. This goes back to the whole idea of, when we repent, it's not just I've realized I've done something wrong. Great, you've realized you did something wrong. So what are you doing about it? You have to change your behavior. You have to do something positive about that realization. The prodigal son, he realized he was sitting, and eating the pig's food, and there was a better option, but he didn't stay there. He got up and did something positive. And so it's the same with this, is that if we realize we've done something wrong and we realize we hurt someone, for example, or whatever, it's good to do that and to realize that and to even acknowledge it to them and to apologize. But that extra step, we have to go that extra step. And like I said, even 4 or 5 times, like, Zacchaeus restored 4-fold. He went above and beyond. And so I think trying to go above and beyond is the Christian way, not just to do what's the minimum kind of requirement. Also notice that in this, is talking about, like, if the thief is, found struck, or, the person who's being robbed defends himself. And so again, we see like how God's mercy is playing out, is that if the person who's being robbed comes to defend themselves at night and can't see what's happening and doesn't, can't see if they've hurt them enough to kill them or whatever, they're fine. And they kill them, they're fine. You're not guilty of that blood because you didn't see what was happening. Think of that time, there's no lights, nothing. It's pitch black at night. But he says if you defend yourself during the day and you can hurt them and stop before you kill them, but you decide to kill them, then it's on you, and you're actually guilty of their blood. And like we see that these days with like that's the whole difference between murder and manslaughter. Like, manslaughter is accidentally killing someone and not wanting to, not intending to, but doing it accidentally. And we have also laws for self-defense. So God was still very fair and wanted and didn't want people to defend themselves to the point of even hurting them, because then there was probably an element of revenge. Like if I see someone robbing me, like, yes, I'm trying to defend myself, but maybe I'm also angry to the point where I can kill them. So God was very fair but also very merciful, even to the thief in the story, in this situation. And again, for us, like, that is a very common theme with God, is that even someone in the midst of their sin, or at a low point in their life spiritually or whatever, God is focused on them. God is focused on bringing them back, on welcoming them back. He's not just sitting back and and waiting, without doing anything, but his whole effort and focus is focused on that person. And that's a very comforting thing, is that no matter where we are, how far we're gone, how low we've gone, that God's attention is focused on us. It's not just, if I come back, he'll welcome me. No, it's his whole effort and desire and love and attention is focused on us returning. And we see that with, like, the prodigal son, for example, where even as he was walking back, the father ran to him. He didn't just wait at the door. He ran to him. Zacchaeus, Christ, called out to him and made the effort to go and visit him and took notice of him. The 99 sheep, Christ left the 99 sheep to go and chase the one. Didn't just wait for the one to come back, but God is always chasing that one person. And so God's whole attention is always on the person who's sinning, which is kind of very counterintuitive. Like, this is God who is good and without sin. Why is he focused on the sinner? Why is he focused on the person who doesn't want him? But that's who he came for. That's, he said, I came for the sick. I didn't come for the well. The well have no need of a physician. I came for the sick. And as, like, for us, it's not an excuse to sin and to be like, oh, well, God will be with me when I sin, and I'll come back. But it's when we find ourselves in those moments that, like, it's a very easy way and a clear way to actually see God's work and to see God's hand in your life. And it's very easy to feel when we've sinned, or when we've, when we're on a spiritual kind of low, it's very easy to feel like hard to come back to God, as if God's going to be ashamed of me, or God's, doesn't want to know about my sin, or, God's going to be, he's not going to accept me. It's very easy to feel like that. And that's the easiest trick of the devil, to force us not to repent, or to convince us not to repent, is that, how can God accept you? How can, he ever take you back? But it's the complete opposite, is that God wants to take us back. He is there with us. Okay, we'll move on, unless anyone has questions about that passage. No? Okay, so we'll move on. If we can read from 5 to 15, that would be good. Someone wants to read, if there's a mic.
If a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed and let loose his animals, and it feeds in another... Sorry, I can't see properly.
If a man causes a field or vineyard to be grazed and lets loose his animal and feeds it on another man's field, he shall make restitution for the best of his own field and the best of his own vineyard. If fire breaks out and catches in thorns, so that stacked again standard grain, all the field is consumed, he who kindled the fire shall surely make restitution. If a man delivers to his neighbor money or articles to keep, and it is stolen out of the man's house, if the thief is found, he shall pay double. If the thief is not found, then the master of the house shall be brought to the judges to see whether he has put his hand into his neighbor's goods. For any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, a donkey, a sheep, or clothing, or for any kind of lost thing which another claims to be his, the cause of both parties shall come before the judges, and whomever the judges condemn shall pay double to his neighbor. If a man delivers to his neighbor a donkey, an ox, a sheep, or any animal to keep, and it dies, is hurt, or is driven away, no one seeing it, then an oath of the Lord shall be between them both, that has not been put in his hand into his neighbor's goods, and the owner of it shall accept that, and he shall not make it good. But if in fact it is stolen from him, he shall make restitution to the owner of it. If it is torn to pieces by a beast, then he shall bring it as evidence, and he shall not make good what was torn. And if a man borrows anything from his neighbor and it becomes injured or dies, the owner of it is not being with it. He shall surely make it good. If its owner was with it, he shall not make it good. If it was hired, it came from its hire.
Thanks. Okay, so again, it's a bit of a difficult and like a bit of a convoluted passage. So for the sake of time, we won't go into too much detail about all the conditions and whatever. But essentially, it's just a continuation of God trying to establish a fair rule for both the thief or the person committing the crime, but also the victim, to make sure that, and in this case, it's talking more about lending, but for example, saying, if you lend someone a cow and the cow is stolen from that person, if that person, wasn't at home and he wasn't doing everything he could to protect it, then he's not responsible. But if he was at home and, it was just his fault of negligence, then that person is required to compensate him. And again, we see that, like I said, these days, if you have a car accident and it's not your fault, then you're fine. If it's your fault, even if it's, like the other person being negligent, but you're also being negligent, then you're also required to pay up. So it's just establishing fairness. And like I said, even from the beginning, we can see that God wanted mercy as well, and not just people to be punished, but he desired mercy. And so when people say, oh, the God of the Old Testament is angry or vindictive or whatever, even right from the beginning, we see that he wasn't. Even right from the beginning, he desired that even the person who commits a crime is looked after and is not held, like we said before, if he's killed in self-defense, because if someone was killed, that you had to compensate his family or whatever. So, if a thief was killed and it was in self-defense at night, then the person was charged with murder and had to suffer that punishment as well. So God wanted justice, but his greatest desire was always mercy. But what we see in this passage is like a great focus on personal responsibility, because the Jews had a habit of putting the blame on others, and we see that with and it started from Adam. Like Adam, as soon as Eve ate the apple, Adam, she gave it to Adam. Oh, Adam, who gave you the apple? Oh, Eve gave me the apple. Oh, Eve, who gave you the apple? Oh, the serpent gave me the apple. So it was always shifting blame. And then Cain, oh, am I my brother's keeper? I don't know where he is. So there's always shifting blame, and God was trying to weed that out a little bit. And so personal responsibility, not just in life is important, but in our life with God, we can only form a relationship with him if we understand where we're going wrong, where our faults are, and being able to acknowledge them. And if we're always shifting the blame to, oh, this is the way I was born, or, it's the group of friends I hang out with, or it's my parents, the way they raised me, we're always shifting blame. We'll never see our faults for what they are and never be able to acknowledge them before God. And sure, there are external circumstances that are imposed on us. But at the end of the day, God is asking just, what are you in control of? There's a quote by St. Isaac the Syrian where he says, the greatest miracle is to be able to acknowledge your own sins, and it's even greater than someone who raises someone from the dead. So if you can imagine someone walking around to tombs and raising people from the dead, he's like, doesn't matter before God. The greatest miracle is to see your own sins, because it is a miracle to be able to let down our pride, to be able to let down our egos, to see what is wrong with us and then humble ourselves. You see that in the world, that people are so unwilling to accept that there is something wrong with them, and that causes so many problems. So it really is a miracle, and it's a miracle by the grace of God. This also links very well to Zacchaeus, like we mentioned before. So when we were saying, I think it's the slide before, we're saying basically if you steal anything, you're required to pay it double. If you go back one slide. For any kind of trespass, whether it concerns an ox, a donkey, a sheep, or clothing, or any kind of lost thing which another claims to be his, whoever the judge condemns shall pay double to his neighbor. So essentially, that was the rule, and in Zacchaeus' case, it was relating to money. So the rule was double. And the reason why we praise Zacchaeus so much, and you know why his repentance was so true, is that not only did he go above and beyond the 10% thing as well, but he gave everything away, and then also paid back 4 times what he stole instead of the 2. And so that's why, it's not the only reason why, but that you could see Zacchaeus' true repentance is that he decided to go above and beyond what was even required of the law at that time. So that's just a little bit of an aside. So in terms of like the most important concept here, I think is stewardship. After the initial, like when the first few verses we're talking about, when we're talking about if a man causes, like if you have a vineyard and then an animal grazes in it, like you let loose your animal to graze in it, then you're responsible for that, whatever damage has happened. And that I see is talking about stewardship. And again, for us, like we don't own fields or vineyards, for people to let loose the animals in, but we have things. We have money, we have time, we have effort, we have talent, skills, or education, whatever it is. And we're given stewardship over that. We're given responsibility for those things. And for the Jews here, even if they didn't steal something, if something they owned caused damage, they were responsible for it. Even something like an animal, like a sheep or an oxen. And so again, we see this whole, God is trying to be fair, even when it comes to damaging other people's property. God is trying to be fair. So for us, we need to examine, I guess, like, what are we given stewardship over? What's causing either good or bad in other people's lives that we own? Are we spending our time causing harm to other people? Are we spending our time just indulging in our own desires? Are we spending our time doing good for other people and doing, serving other people? Is our money bringing about good or evil for our lives or for other people? These are all things God has given us, like the sheep, the Israelite sheep. These are all things that can cause good or evil to other people and for ourselves as well. And even, it comes down, even like the habits that we develop, like what's our time being spent on? Is it just social media, gossiping, judging people, watching stuff that is not edifying? Whatever it is, this is all things that that we've been given stewardship over, and that we'll be asked to account for. How did you spend your time? Was it for me? Was it in my service, or was it chasing worthless things? With regards to wealth, this is something that St. Basil, I don't know if anyone's read Wealth and Poverty. St. John Chrysostom talks a lot about it as well, but St. Basil was very, very big on social justice, because at that time there was the church, but the church was quite wealthy, and there was a very big divide. There was a very big high class, upper class, and very big lower class, a very big divide. Sorry. So St. Basil was very big on this. So keep that in mind with this quote, because it is very harsh, but I think sometimes a bit of harshness from the church fathers is necessary. But he says, how many people could one of your, so he's talking about people's use of their own money. How many people could one of your fingers release from debt? How many broken down homes could be rebuilt? One box of your clothing would be able to dress the whole shivering populace, but you, unfeeling, dismiss the needy, not fearing the just repayment of the judge. You have not shown mercy, you shall not receive mercy. You've not opened your home, you shall be evicted from the kingdom. You haven't given of your bread, neither shall you receive eternal life. It's a very harsh, and like this is 3 sentences of like a 5-page sermon. So you can imagine like the people sitting in the congregation listening to all of this, what they would have done after. But it's just a reminder that everything we've been given, we've been lent. Like in the liturgy, we say we give to you of what is yours. It's a very, when you think about it, it's very silly that, we're offering to God of what is His, as if, we're doing God a favor. Like everything we have is God's, and we're just, lending it back to Him. It's very silly. And so God is actually giving it to us, lending it to us, seeing if, we can actually make use of it. And everything belongs to Him at the end of the day. And He's going to ask us about it, and it doesn't mean that we go and give away everything, but He's going to ask us as much as we can. We should try. there was about stewardship as well. We're also given stewardship over how we act and how we talk and how we think. And this is a very important thing, especially as youth, that a lot of people, whether it's similar age youth or younger youth, look up to us. And even in the workplace or at uni or whatever, we are role models, whether we like it or not, because unfortunately there is an expectation of how Christians should act even. And you'll find that the world will actually hold you to that standard, even if they don't hold themselves to that standard. They actually hold Christians. Like I remember one Lent, at work they'd ordered coffee and I hadn't ordered almond milk, and they came up to me like, "Aren't you fasting?" Like, shouldn't I'm like, "Who asked you? Like, just let me order normal milk." But they hold us to a standard, even whether we like it or not. So it's really important that we're always aware of how our actions and words are, how that's perceived by everyone else. There was research that was done on Christian youth in America, and they found that there was 3 reasons or 3 factors that determined if youth stayed in church or not once they left Sunday school, because it was done on the Greek Orthodox Church, and the Greek Orthodox Church has a big problem of essentially no youth. They grow up in Sunday school, whatever, and then the church empties. For multitude of reasons, but they decided to do research. So they found that the 3 big reasons were the absence of an experience with God. They hadn't experienced the divine. The second reason was the faith of the parents, and the third was role models. They were the 3 big reasons. And that's what they're kind of trying to target, is making sure that the family is well structured and has faith, and that there are good role models around children. I don't think many of us have kids, so the parents one doesn't apply, but we're definitely role models. And that's something we've been given stewardship over, is the example we set. And it's something God takes extremely seriously. Like we'll talk, when he talks in the rest of the passage about oppressing the weak, but God takes how we lead the most vulnerable of our community, of our church, of even society, extremely seriously. Like even in the Gospels, where he says, it's better that you're drowned in a lake with a stone around your neck that you lead someone astray. So it's a very serious thing that we should take seriously, because we might be we might be going astray and not on the right path. But how much worse is it if we take someone with us, and if that person takes someone with them, and it builds. And so it's something again that we need to remember, and not that we're constantly self-conscious of what we're doing and make sure that we're acting one way in front of people and acting one way or whatever, but that we are an example, and that we should be first working on ourselves to make sure that the example we set is a positive one. Okay, we'll keep going. If someone can read 16 to 20. Someone that can preferably see. You guys have a sight problem.
If a man entices a virgin who is not betrothed and lies with her, he shall surely pay the bride price for her to be his wife. If her father utterly refuses to give her to him, he shall pay money according to the bride price of virgins. You shall not permit a sorceress to live. Whoever lies with an animal shall surely be put to death. He who sacrifices to any god except to the Lord only, he shall be utterly destroyed. You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt.
Okay, we'll stop there, sorry. So 16 to 20 is essentially just talking about sexual immorality and being very clear about it. And like it gets a very short mention, given how much the Bible just talks about sexual immorality. It's surprising that it just gets a small mention. But obviously, I'm not going to discuss sorceresses because I feel like it's a bit irrelevant to us, but it's very clear. 18, sorceress. 19, bestiality, and it's very obviously wicked sin. And 20 is talking about sacrificing to idols. But if we talk about 16 for a second, essentially what he's talking about here is like relationships before marriage and premarital sex. So God was trying to be very clear about this and to lay it out from the start, because he could see that this sort of behavior was going to have real consequences for the people of Israel. He was here trying to establish a nation and trying to establish good morals and trying to establish people that would be loyal to him. And part of this was strong families and strong leadership. And he saw that premarital relationships were going to destroy all of this. And so he was very clear. And we see it these days, it has the same effect. So the problem that was with casual relationships and in that time is that as well, now as well, exactly the same, is that there was no commitment required. You do whatever and, walk away. And there was nothing tying the man and the woman to each other or to the children. There was no commitment. So God was trying kind of stamp that out. And it was a very wise and powerful law that God was laying down. Because I said there was, not having this law and having all these casual relationships and children coming out of all these relationships, you would have had broken families and children without fathers or mothers, or, and especially like for women, especially in that time, a woman who wasn't married was essentially, worthless and had no one to look after her, no one to provide for her, couldn't be married again. So it was a very, very difficult situation for women who weren't married in that time. And so the purpose of this was God was actually trying to protect women and children as well, and trying to protect the family unit. And so, as we said, one of the big reasons for marriage is it formalizes commitment, which, like in the 21st century, it's a very, commitment is something that is, shied away from, and we all want to not be tied down and do whatever we want and be free and whatever. But there was a very certain wisdom about being committed and having that formalized. Like up until probably 80 or 100 years ago, casual sex and premarital relationships were actually very dangerous, because there was no contraception, there was no medicine, there was no care for the baby after it was born. So to engage in that was potentially fatal for the mother and for the child. It wasn't something to be taken, just to be done very lightly. These days, obviously, the situation is very different. So, back then it was a very serious thing, and the mother could have died, or the baby could have been premature, and there was nothing to look after them. So that was something that was on your mind. Like an example of this is David, for example, when he decided to sleep with Bathsheba. Look at the ripple effects of all of that. Bathsheba was shamed. Her husband ended up being murdered. The baby ended up dying, and David was was distraught, and he wasn't able to build the kingdom, to build the temple. Sorry. So it has effects, whether we like it or not. It has effects that we have to be aware of. And unfortunately, society has made it that it's acceptable and accessible at everyone, anytime, whenever you want it. It's there, and we see it now. It's destroying families. There's the family is no more something that is attained. It's if anything, having a normal family is actually the minority now. Having mother, father, children is actually it's seen a little bit weird. And it's funny, we were talking the other day just about this topic and what's happening, and we were saying these days it's becoming a thing to actually come out as Christian. To have your moment as when you're asked about topics of homosexuality or transgender or whatever, and you're asked about this, you have your moment of, I have to express now that I'm Christian. And that's becoming it's a scary thing for a lot of people. A lot of people are, like a friend was telling me about being a teacher and how they had this these days for showing, being that you're not homophobic or you're not transphobic or whatever, and you had to wear a particular color and all this sort of thing. And that person was extremely worried that if they were the only person, and they worked in a particular school that was very supportive of this sort of thing, and they were very concerned, how is it going to look if I'm the only person? Am I going to be asked about it? What do I say? It was actually very, anxiety provoking. And thank God, I think God worked it so that there was a lot of other people who had the same opinion, and it wasn't a big issue she wasn't asked about it. But it's something that we will face more and more, and we're going to become the minority. I think it's St. Anthony that says, there will become a time when the world will look at us as crazy. So it's something we have to be aware of. Just like while looking up this, I decided to just look up a few interesting, like a bit of interesting research about this, because it is like we talk about the rate of divorce and how it's increasing or whatever. And it seems to be that it was very clear where we were heading. So I'll just tell you a few of these things that I found, because I think the pattern is very interesting. Is that women with zero, and I think there was no difference between men and women, but this study just focused on women. Women with 0 to 1 partners before marriage were the least likely out of a study that looked at up to 10 plus partners. Women that didn't have any partners were the ones least likely to divorce. In the 70s, 2% of women had 10 plus partners. And in 2010, this was almost 20%, and almost 20 times. So we see that God, even from the times of Exodus, could see, how this was going to impact us, that these sort of relationships and not struggling for our purity before marriage has a real consequence. It's not just a sin. It is a sin, but it has a real consequence, because it leads to a lot of breakdowns in relationships and communication, and so it's something that, again, just as youth, I think we should be aware of and not take lightly. And not just about the bad effects, but I think God had a vision and does have a vision of what a good marriage should be like. And that comes from Adam and Eve in the garden. They lived in complete unity, in complete purity, in complete no shame, no nothing, not hiding anything from each other, and always having God as the focal point of your relationship. And that's the vision he has. That's the vision that he's trying to get people to come back to with this law. Is saying that within marriage, it's this like amazing thing that I'm trying to get you to come back to, but we're ruining it with everything else. And I'm sure, like, if you talk to any priest, they'll tell you that premarital relationships are, a very big determinant of whether this relationship will succeed or not. And, from like older youth that have talked to us, they've always said that when a relationship wasn't pure before marriage, you could tell where it was going. So it's again just an important thing, I think, that God emphasizes and he continues to emphasize throughout the rest of the Bible as well. Okay, we'll read from 21 to 31, and that'll be the end of it. If someone else wants to read.
You shall
Thanks.
You shall neither mistreat a stranger nor oppress him, for you are strangers in the land of Egypt. You shall not afflict any widow or fatherless child. If you afflict them in any way and they cry at all to me, I will surely hear their cry. And my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with the sword. Your wives shall be widows, and your children fatherless. If you lend money to any of my people who are poor among you, you shall not be like a moneylender to him. You shall not charge him interest. If you ever take your neighbor's garments as a pledge, you shall return it to him before the sun goes down. For that is his only covering, it is his garment for his skin. What will he sleep in? And it will be that when he cries to me, I will hear, for I am gracious. You shall not revile God, nor curse a ruler of your people. You shall not delay to offer the first of your ripe produce and your juices. The firstborn of your sons you shall give to me. Likewise you shall do with your oxen and your sheep. It shall be with its mother 7 days. On the 8th day you shall give it to me. And you shall be holy men to me. You shall not eat meat torn by beasts in the field. You shall throw it to the dogs.
Okay. So in the first part, 21 to 25, God is trying to protect the weakest of our society and the most vulnerable. And he's essentially saying, like, look where you came from. You know what it felt like in Egypt to be, discriminated against, to be persecuted, to be treated like nothing. Why repeat that cycle of behavior? Why continue to make other people feel like that? If you know how painful it is, why make someone else feel like that? And it seems that the Jews had this kind of idea of an eye for an eye. I was treated like this. I need to treat someone else like this. And like I said, we have this idea sometimes that in the Old Testament, it was kind of one for one, and then Jesus came and said, oh, love your enemies. Even from the beginning, it was the same law of love. It was the same law of mercy. It looked a little bit different because of the context that they lived in, but it was the same. It was exactly the same, is that I want you to have mercy. If you got treated like this, I want you to treat someone the complete opposite. If you have a stranger, and you were a stranger, don't treat them the same way you were treated. Turn it around. Change that pattern of behavior. I'm sure it was very easy, and like even for us, it's very easy when we've been treated a certain way to become bitter and to become, to kind of internalize that and be like if we're, for example, we're in a new workplace and we're treated harshly, we sometimes want to be like, oh, like I want someone to experience that same pain because I had to go through it, and people should understand my pain, and everyone should go through this because it's the way things are done. But God is trying to say, like, it's not how it should be, and it's foreshadowing the law of love that Christ gave in the New Testament. Luke 6, like he says, love your enemies. Do good to those who persecute you, not do good. Treat your enemies the way they're treating you. If someone persecutes you, you persecute them back. So it's exactly the same. It's the same God. It's the same law of love, but it looks a little bit different. And he's especially emphasizing the treatment of the weak and the oppressed, the widows, the fatherless children, the orphans, and the poor. And God is very harsh about these crimes for a particular reason, that those people cannot defend themselves. They have no one to speak for them. They have no one to stand up for them. And so God has to. And that's a very scary thing to come up against, is that if the way we treat the people who have no one to speak for them, you're going to come up against God speaking for them. For us, that's very comforting as well, is that if we're mistreated, if we don't speak up for ourselves, God will speak up for us. God will defend us. But yeah, it's a very like the language that he uses, is you shall not afflict any widow. If you afflict them in any way and they cry out to me, I will hear their cry, and my wrath will become hot, and I will kill you with your sword. And your wives shall be widows and your children fatherless. Like, it's so harsh. It's so like, is this fair? And I think it is. Like, why fair enough if you fight someone who's it's self-defense, someone who came up against you, and you decide to, it's one-on-one, it's equal. This is not even a fair fight, and that's what he's trying to say. And then God has a heart for these people, and that, like in the early church, we see that St. Paul and St. Peter were always focused on the widows, the children, the orphans, the fatherless. That was his focus, because someone was widowed. In that time, there was no income, there was no more money, there was no one to defend them. The father was the defender of the home. He was the public face of the home. All of a sudden, the widow is on her own. Who's going to protect her? The church is going to protect her. And that was a very important thing. So for us, I think there's two kind of clear messages for that, is that obviously we don't mistreat these sections of our community, but that we take extra care and put extra attention on them. And yeah, like maybe we don't have, men that are going off to war and being killed and leaving behind children and widows. But we still have vulnerability, and we have poverty everywhere we go. We have broken homes with husbands and wives on their own who've, separated, and they're feeling that the burden is too much. They can't raise children on their own. They can't come to church anymore because of the shame, because of it's taboo and whatever. They're struggling. We have people who are struggling with loneliness, and they feel they come to church and there's no one to talk to them, and and they feel excluded or whatever. So especially with those people, God is asking us to take care of them. Definitely don't mistreat them. Definitely don't make them even worse than it is. But let's take extra care with them. Let's have the same heart that God has for them, because, and it goes back to the first verse, verse 16, is that if we've been treated like that, if we've ever been excluded, if we've ever been, treated harshly, we know the pain, and our reaction shouldn't be, I want someone else to feel that pain. Is that I'd never want someone else to feel that pain. And there was a interview that we were very lucky to do recently. It's on the St. Mark's YouTube channel. I don't know if I'm allowed to plug St. Mark's, but we did it with Father Mina Abud's widow. I don't know if you guys know who Father Mina is, but he was a priest in Sinai, martyred, I think 10 years ago. And essentially now he's a bit of an unofficial saint. Like I think there's like 7 books of his miracles that have been written in 10 years. So respect to his widow, his wife, and like if I tell you that she was the most joyful woman I've ever met, it's an understatement. Like she didn't stop smiling for an hour and a half. And everyone in the church was like crying and upset, and she's just like smiling and laughing, and like it just didn't make sense. Genuinely didn't make sense. But it's obviously undeniable that God has given her a special grace and joy because of the suffering that she's gone through, and she's got 2 university-aged daughters as well. I think they were like primary school when the priest was martyred. But obviously God has given her a special joy and peace because of what's happened. But one of her services now is a widows ministry, where she goes around to widows and comforts them. And she was saying that it's for widows, especially, and I think especially in Egypt, they're not as developed in terms of grief counseling and that sort of thing. So they take it really hard, and the grief is almost sometimes to the point where actually they become physically ill and they're hospitalized. And she sees that, and so it's for us. It was like an example of someone who used exactly that pain that she felt, that grief that she felt, but then she turned it around and she's like, I never want anyone to feel anything like that ever again. But it was really opened my eyes. Like it's obviously we don't see a lot of it these days. Young widows especially. It's mostly people who are quite much older. But I think sometimes we forget a little bit about them, and we forget about the people who have lost people and the people who are grieving, and it's uncomfortable. It's uncomfortable sitting with people who have had members pass away, family members pass away. Don't know what to say, and it's hard. But I think what we've found, and I think any priest can attest to this, is that God is closest to those people who are suffering. And if you want to meet God, if you want to have an experience with God, go and sit with the people who are suffering. Go and sit with the people who are oppressed, who are vulnerable, because that's where you'll find God. That's where you'll find Christ. And in the New Testament, Christ was always with the sinners and the tax collectors and the people who were being sworn at and persecuted. That was where Christ was. So if you lived in first century Palestine and you wanted to meet Jesus, you had to go to a tax collector's house, and that's what the adulterous woman did. So you had to go to those people's houses and you had to associate with them. Deb from Exodus, she has this great saying where she says, if you want to meet Christ, go and sit at the gates of hell, because that's where he is, rescuing people from hell, rescuing people from getting into hell. And it's it's a bit hard to think about. We come to church and whatever. It's like, how do I? And it's like I said, it's all around us. The suffering is all around us. You just have to open your eyes and you'll see. The last point is in terms of the vulnerable. Sorry, I've said it a few times, so maybe a few of you have heard about a church in Egypt recently that they were in the middle of a Sunday sermon, and someone came in the middle and just basically sat there when the priest was doing the Sunday sermon. And I don't think the priest was wrong in doing anything, but he basically just told the deacons, get him to sit in one of the pews, maybe to make space or whatever. But, went to sit in the deacon's pew, and the deacon's like, there's no space. And then he kept going, and everyone was like, there's no space. And, no one wanted to move for him. And he was this homeless looking, smelly guy in Egypt, barefooted and, just looking at a place. And then essentially he just walks to the back and decides to leave and turns around and waves to the priest. And the priest sees holes in his hand, signifying that it was Christ that we were kicking out of church. And so again, it's an important reminder that if we don't consider the poorest and the weakest of our society, then it doesn't matter if we have communion. Like, we're never going to find Christ in church, because Christ is also in those beggars and is in the weakest, is in the lowest, is in the least of that around us. And that's what God was trying to emphasize with the Jews. He's trying to make sure that, yes, I've saved you from Egypt. Now it's time that you guys look around and make sure that you don't treat people the same way that you were treated, and that you take everyone with you. That you're only as strong as your weakest. And that's a very brief summary of Exodus 22. So if you have any questions, one is at the back. Good. questions? Good. Glory be to God. Oh, you had a question? No? Good.
Thank you very much, Mark. Such a beautiful talk on Exodus chapter 22. So to continue on, or to finish off the night, we're going to end off with prayer.